Hi everybody, Christy Giannoni back in week 5 for MP 594, preparing for the comprehensive exam. This week we're taking a look at Psml, and I will go ahead and get right into it since we have a lot to cover. And so the change that needs to be made is the City of Glendora needs to implement succession planning. So how they're going to do this is they will hire a Director of Human Resources to implement the succession planning framework within the fiscal year budget cycle. So that's about 12 months from June to July. So how they're going to be doing this is through 3 phases, which will have a couple different themes incorporated in it. So first phase is going to be to observe. They're going to take a look at what's going on, observe, analyze, understand why this change needs to be made and what came about, what kind of prompted it. Then they're going to recommend, they're going to do some type of impact analysis, risk assessment, how they're going to lead all of the employees, what the cost is going to look like, negotiations, and recommend that to the city manager. And from there, it would go to the city council. And then phase three, they're going to implement. They're going to implement and communicate the change and also motivate their employees to follow along. So in the first phase of observing, the overarching theorist that I'm going to be using is Gulick. So we're going to be taking from POSIT-Core planning and coordination, and then we're going to look at efficiency, goals, and operations. So for efficiency, obviously we have Taylor. So we're going to look and see, is something going on that they were trying to do this one best way that's maybe not working? A lot of cities have a pretty strict personnel system, personnel rules that guide how individuals can be hired, reclassed, promoted, and then class and compensation, which can be challenging because to make those changes, you typically have to go to council. So it's a very arduous process. It takes a long time. So we may have been doing something the one best way that's no longer working. And then Elton Mayo in the Hawthorne effect, we have to take that into consideration because as individuals are being observed, are we really going to be seeing what's been going on, or is something going to be changing because they are being watched? And then we have Merton and these bureaucratic dysfunctions when organizations overconform to rules, regulations, and procedures. Maybe this is where we can see what needs to be changed. And then looking at the goals, we have to take into consideration Riddle and Weber wicked problems. Will this change solve the problem that's actually happening, or is there something larger going on? Is there just things going on in the workforce in general across all agencies that maybe we can't change with a succession planning framework? And then also taking into consideration Chester Barnard's natural systems perspective and organizations needing to adapt to survive. So that's what we kind of need to take a look at in the analyzation phase, is how we need to adapt to different generations, different kind of motivations, in order to move forward and make the succession planning framework successful. And then in general, in the operations, going to take a look at FAIL's 14 principles of management, looking how the workforce is currently structured, use a little bit of Mary Parker Follett and transformational leadership, and then also, again, taking a look at Merton and how this is going to be structured and what's kind of working and what's not. All right, and then in phase 2, this step is going to be to recommend. Again, Gulick, overarching theorist. At this point, we're going to be organizing, staffing, budgeting, and reporting. So organizing, we're going to be establishing kind of a formal structure. What does this look like for a new succession planning framework? Staffing, do we need to bring in new individuals? Do we need to have training for supervisors and managers for the new responsibilities that they're taking on? And then budgeting will be a big one. So the changes in position will likely require recommended changes to the fiscal year budget. And then reporting, we want to make sure that we are keeping our city manager informed along the way, supervisors, as well as any type of labor negotiations. So what's going to tie in here is going to be personnel management, new jobs needing to be created, ensuring that the Pendleton Act is kind of incorporated for support for reclassifications based on qualifying KSAs or knowledge, skills, and ability, human resources management, making sure we're being transparent about these changes to our employees, and Paul Appleby, staffing organizations with individuals who have public interest attitudes and making sure that we're getting the right individuals in. Labor negotiations is going to play a part. The additions will affect the union membership and changes, so we want to make sure that we're notifying them through impact bargaining. And the type of leadership style that's going to emerge throughout this is going to be a collaborative style. We want to lead with collaboration from the key internal and external stakeholders so that when the process is actually implemented in this next step, we have backing and support, and it makes it an easier process. And so finally, we are in phase 3. The Human Resources Director is going to do the implementation from Gulick. They're going to be directing and reporting. And so communication is going to be a big one here. We want to make sure, like Chester Barnard talks about, how that informal and formal communication affects trust. So the leadership messaging from the top down, all of these things that we were doing in phase 2 truly comes out and is implemented at this step. Edgar Sheen's level of organizational culture. How can we ensure that this succession planning framework is going to align with the organizational culture at hand? Utilizing FAIL to talk about unity of command and unity of direction, making sure all of our managers and supervisors are on the same page. When we take a look at management, Gulick's really going to tie in here for what are the functions of managers? What are the responsibilities of not only this HR director, but the city manager and the supervisor is going to be? Lewin and Leichhardt theory of participative management, again, making sure that we're kind of having everyone buy in on this idea, because it's going to make it a lot easier so that when supervisors, mid-management, on the ground workers, they're all kind of knowing what's going on, understanding, and helping to push forward with the implementation. Katz and Kahn, relooking at the idea of organizations as a machine. So we're kind of wanting to see what this impact looks like. How is this going to move forward with the people who are actually impacted? Transformational theory is going to tie in here. Transformational theory talks about that conflict is not necessarily negative. So conflict is between what is and what we believe ought to be. So there might be individuals who are impacted of what their roles or responsibilities are. And then maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Sometimes we hear in an organization, well, this is the way we've always done it. So change can be kind of hard. Looking at Doble and the ethical leader, we want to make sure that we're upholding ethics throughout this process, that if individuals are going to be promoted or reclassed, we're looking at everybody equally. We're upholding those kind of virtues and ethics as we are public servants and making sure that we're being transparent. And then Hersey and Blanchard's situational leadership. There's going to be various leadership styles used throughout this process. At some point, we may be needing to be a little more autocratic. We may need to be charismatic. So it's going to transform as we are going through each of the process. And then lastly, motivation is going to be a big one. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Is the results of this change beneficial to both employees and management? Is it actually accomplishing what that change needed to be, that we needed succession planning? People are going to stay. Vroom's expectancy theory, we're going to examine the role of individuals' perceptions in determining behavior, offer insights into the choices that people are making. So kind of what's going to keep them pushing along. Chris Aguirre, we want to make sure that we're meeting those fundamental needs for personal growth, providing opportunities for workers to satisfy their growth needs. And so that's what that step 2 was. How do we make these positions something of value for individuals to stay? Path goal theory of leadership, the expectation that a task can be accomplished and that it leads to reward. So we're trusting that this, implementation of a succession planning is actually going to furnish positive expectations and positive rewards for both the employees and management. And then generational differences is going to come into play again. Want to make sure that we are understanding what impacts motivation and how different generations have different backgrounds and understandings and what they want to do for their loyalty and change and opportunity, and making sure that that's taken into consideration for these new classifications. So basically, we want to make sure that we are getting the succession planning in order to identify kind of what was missing, why this change needed to be incorporated. And by doing so, we're going to increase employee engagement and retention and keep talent in the pipeline, which will affect the community, right? Because if you've got a constant turnover, we may not be providing effective public service. So that's why we want to make sure that we get this in. All right, thank you. We're 1 week closer. I look forward to your feedback, any additional theorists I can incorporate, and looking forward to working with you all in our study group next week.